So for my extended lesson plan, I did a fourth and fifth grade theater and science integrated lesson plan. And the title of my lesson is What is Wind? So the big idea is throughout time and across cultures, artists help us celebrate the beauty of the forces of nature that can't be seen or perfectly represented. The key concepts that we'll be focusing on will be artists have the ability to represent what can't be spoken or observed. Artists find inspiration within nature's forces, and artists are not constricted by lack of materials as they can create out of anything. So for the summary of my lesson, it's obviously centered around wind, and it teaches students that there are so many different ways to represent and describe something, which doesn't need to be constricted by words. And this is really good to use wind for this, which I think is the best way to demonstrate that something doesn't need to be constricted by words because you can't see wind. It's invisible to the naked eye. So students will be doing this through sharing their own personal experiences, creating visual models of the Beaufort scale, analyzing real wind representations from artists, and also doing group work performing pantomime skits, which show their own representations. So the first day will start off with the teacher writing the word wind on the board without giving them any context, saying, what comes to mind when you think of the word wind? Each of the students will add a word to this board to create a concept map, and the teacher will explain that because we can't see wind with our own eyes, we must describe it by its effects, which we'll see by all the words on the concept map. For the development of this lesson, the teacher will put up the What is Wind PowerPoint, which just focuses to give background knowledge on like the scientific part of wind, what is wind. And on the last side, it will say, think of a time where you remember noticing the effects of the wind. So students will share and discuss. There'll be a group discussion about this. Next, teachers will place the students in groups where each of them will get one of two poems. So the students will each read the poem aloud with their group and discuss it while the teacher walks around aiding like the students. And the students will ask, or the teacher will ask questions such as, how does the author use words to show the wind's presence? And you can see the last slide right there. And then this is also just to show the whole slideshow. This is the scientific, just to give them background knowledge. This is an example of one of the poems. So it's called Who Has Seen the Wind? Who has seen the wind? Neither I nor you, but when the leaves hang trembling, the wind is passing through. Who has seen the wind? Neither you nor I, but when the trees bow down their heads, the wind is passing by. So for the close of the first day, the teachers will engage the students in a class discussion, comparing the two poems, asking questions such as, how do the two authors' attitudes towards wind differ from each other? And then they'll also be encouraged to share their personal opinions about the poem. The teacher will also just do a quick review of the PowerPoint material just to make sure they remember it for the next day. And then we'll say, tomorrow we will look deeper into the levels of wind and how we can scientifically describe types of wind, just to get them ready for the next day. So for the motivation of the next day, this teacher will start by putting back up the concept map from the previous day. And this time it's obviously the filled in concept map. So they can get their head back in the mindset of wind and also just to look at their first impressions. And the teacher will say, after reflecting on the first day of lessons, is there any change in your perspective of wind? So for the development, the teacher will introduce the Beaufort scale, telling them that it's the way that scientists see the speed of wind and the observable effects of it. So each student will be handed a worksheet that's shown right here, and the teacher will put up a PowerPoint about the Beaufort scale that will go through each of the levels. And while they're doing this, the students can fill along just to fill in the title and the speed of each one. And this is just an example of that PowerPoint showing where they will fill in with matching pictures. And then for the close of that day, the teacher will collect the worksheets and then remind the students that yesterday we saw some creative interpretations of wind through poems. So today they will be looking at them through paintings. So the teacher will show the class 3 paintings, 2 that are famous paintings, and 1 was actually done by a child. The teacher can say, even though we know we can't see the wind in real life, how can we visually see it in the paintings? So the class will discuss this. The students can compare, contrast, and then share their opinions about the paintings. And then the class this day will end with, now that we know that there are so many different ways to interpret and describe wind, tomorrow we will be creating our own wind representations. So these are the 3 paintings. 1 is by Wong Kar Wai, and 1 is actually by Vincent van Gogh. And I think those are good wind representations. And then also this was done, the last one was done by a 13-year-old girl. And I think that's also a really good material to show that you don't need to be a famous painter to create something, a good representation. So for the 3rd day, the teacher will start off by putting a picture of this sculpture with no context, just telling them that it's in Hong Kong, and people come all over to see it, asking the students what they think this is trying to represent, because it's really abstract. And after many guesses, the teacher will tell the students that the goal of the artist was recreating the beauty of nature. And we'll actually get back to this later in the lesson, or this day. So for the first part of the development, it will start off with an artist spotlight. The teacher will show a PowerPoint about Janet Eichelman, and this PowerPoint basically just goes through her obstacles, how she became a sculptor because she never was planning to, and it will also talk about her inspiration towards nature, which really connects our lesson. She even has a piece that is a real representation of wind. And the teacher will ask questions such as, how do you think this artist feels based or about the wind based on these sculptures? This is just that PowerPoint about Janet Eichelman. And then these are 3 of her famous paintings. The first one is her first fishnet painting. The second one is the one in Hong Kong. And then the third one is her representation of wind. And then lastly, there will be an assessment performance. The teacher will put up the instructions on the board and make groups, 12 groups. And each of the groups will select one of the 12 Beaufort scale levels, and they will represent this in a pantomime way. The students will watch a video first to familiarize themselves with pantomime, just because it's not a super known thing, but it is a good way to represent something without words or without needing any other materials except for yourself. So they'll get 35 minutes to work on that with their group, and then they will perform, each group will perform, and then each group will have a quick discussion with the class after. And this is just the rubric for that. Most of it is a group grade, except for the collaboration part, which is an individual grade. And then the teacher will put, lastly for the close, put back on the board the original wind concept map from the first day, and ask the students, how has your opinion of wind changed over the past 3 days? What activities influence your perspective the most? So the students will think about this, and then the teacher will give each student a piece of blank journal paper for them to write a graded reflection, using what they've learned to describe the strength and movement of the wind, list 3 ways the wind is described, and reflect on their personal experience. And then as soon as they hand in the reflection, they'll be dismissed. This is the rubric for that. It's less specific than the other rubric, but just to get an understanding of what they know. And then for my exemplar, this is the one that I included in my written lesson plan, and I represented the 3rd wind force, which is gentle breeze. And I tried to make my arms like branches in the wind, and then also like my hair blowing in the wind to represent that. And I could also do another exemplar of like the 12th level of the scale, which is more, obviously it's like hurricane, and it would be just a more, really more intense movement. So that would just be my representation. Obviously the students would have a longer one and be representing each one. Um, and so I'm just going to be teaching a part of my lesson, and the part is going to be day 3 of my development, and it's part 1 of the development. It's the artist spotlight. So this will be the PowerPoint that's shown. So next is our artist spotlight, and we're going to be talking about Janet Eichelman. So who is Janet Eichelman? She is shown right there. She is a current sculptor. She actually was never planning on being a sculptor, though. She was first a painter, and she had a very hard time to, she was a failed painter. So she started off getting denied from 7 different art schools until she finally decided that to move to India and stop trying to become a painter. She was just going to teach painting for the US Embassy. But she ran into an obstacle when her paints didn't ship with her when she went to India. So she was obviously in a bit of a rut. She didn't know what to do. But instead of letting it ruin her experience, she decided to take the beauty in her everyday indigenous situation and make it into something pretty beautiful and what she thought was amazing. So first you can see here, this was her first sculpture while she was actually in India. That first time when she forgot her paints, or the paints didn't come, she had the help of fishermen, and she made a beautiful sculpture using all fish nets. So this was in 1997, and obviously she has come so far since then, but she it was just the idea of creating something beautiful out of everyday things. And her biggest inspiration is nature. And she even started to list the sky as one of her materials, with like her sculpting materials, just because it's one of her biggest inspirations. She actually has, in the Smithsonian Museum, she was commissioned to create a sculpture called for the Wonder exhibit. And she chose to create a representation of nature in the fact that it is an actual representation of wind. She used the fiber that NASA had designed for their suits, that billows and changes shapes with the wind, so that you can see like that representation of wind in her sculpture when you see that. So that's a picture of it here. But I think it's a great example to connect to our lesson with the fact that anything can represent wind. So here, this is the one that you guys saw at the beginning of this lesson. This was shown, and you got to see what your representation of it was, even though it doesn't really show anything specific. Now you can see that she has a lot of inspiration towards nature, and she has many goals in these sculptures. Thank you so much. I hope you now will think more deeply about the beauty of wind, and I hope you enjoyed my lesson.